1990s saw the return of the creature feature, films that harked back to the heyday of 50s monster movies or 70s animal attack films, often shot on medium or large budgets with big ensemble casts. In 1990, Steven Spielberg's production company Amblin produced a spider attack movie inspired by 1977's Kingdom of the Spiders. With an ensemble cast that included Jeff Daniels, Julian Sands, and John Goodman, it became known as one of the scariest and most entertaining spider attack movies ever made. Meanwhile, that same year, director Ron Underwood was making his own, slightly more modest monster movie, inspired by the giant monster attack films of the 1950s, starring Kevin Bacon about a small town in Nevada being attacked by giant prehistoric worm-like monsters. While Arachnophobia was a box office smash, Tremors was initially a commercial flop, but over time became a cult favorite, one that ended up spawning a franchise of 6 sequels.
Can you fly, you sucker? Can you fly?
Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of nature in horror, and we discuss 2 1990 creature features, Arachnophobia and Tremors. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer. As ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season exploring the evolution of nature in horror. We're discussing a whole bunch of fun animal attack movies and creature features, and this is part 22. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we've got 2 absolute bangers from 1990, Arachnophobia and Tremors. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. Give them both a watch. They are so much fun before you listen to our discussion. So joining me later on in this episode will be Steph McKenna to discuss Tremors in depth. But let's start with one of the scariest spider movies ever made. I sat down with a friend of the pod, film producer Jen Handorf, to discuss why Arachnophobia remains to this day one of the creepiest movies of all time. Enjoy.
The Jennings family has just moved to the small town of Canaima.
Oh, Ross, smell that air. Oh, God.
In search of a simpler life.
Want a bullfrog?
Okay.
It's the perfect place,
Goodbye crime, goodbye grime.
except for one pesky little problem.
Come with me and look at the web.
The web? I have a terrible fear of spiders. Come on, we live in the country now. It's time to work through this irrational, paralyzing terror. It's not irrational.
Hello, Jen Handorf.
Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you, Jen? You've had a hectic few weeks by the sounds of it.
I have. It's all been very exciting and filmmakery, and it's all, yeah. I just got back from this absolutely crazy 2-week like workshop mentorship thing, and I can't believe I've said this phrase multiple times now, and I still can't believe it. With Werner Herzog on a volcanic island in the Canaries. Yeah, right. Like, what? Huh? And it was exactly everything you would imagine it to be. I got to direct a film with Werner Herzog giving feedback the entire time, and
wow.
I am forever changed. It is not an understatement to say I am forever changed.
This is incredible. Congratulations, first of all. I mean, that's so fucking exciting. We actually covered Grizzly Man a couple of weeks ago on this very podcast, and we talked a lot about Werner. What was he like in person? What was he like to work with?
I mean, he, like, exactly as expected. Like, wise, sage, insane, anti-establishment, unique in every sense. It was a breathtaking experience. And then obviously, like, there were other filmmakers in the program. It wasn't just my own little Make-A-Wish scenario. There were other filmmakers participating, and they were amazing. Getting to meet and work with them was amazing. But yeah, I literally now have a notebook filled with custom Werner Herzog quotes, which will eventually be t-shirts.
Oh.
So that's fine.
Oh my God. How is your Werner Herzog impression now, having spent time with him?
No. Because like before, in my head, it was really passable before. Like in my head, I was, 2 minutes away from my type 5 at the Comedy Cellar. But I realize now his actual voice is in my head now, and I will never be able to do the actual voice. So it's
a really hard one to pull off, that voice, isn't it? It is
well,
hard.
and
Yeah.
I'm an American woman. I'm not a German man, so it's but yeah, it's I'm sort of far away from the starting point as well. But like, yeah, I'll share this one because he said to us all the time, he said, "Do the doable," and that's as much as the impression I can do.
Do
But,
the
like,
doable.
do
Yeah.
the doable. That's incredible. But yeah, all this stuff about like follow what fascinates you and don't hesitate and like all this the ecstatic truth and all that kind of stuff. But like yeah, absolutely wicked, and my brain is frazzled. And then immediately when I came back, I got to do the production finance market at London Film Festival. Oof. Where I'm pitching my directorial debut, the Cabin in the Woods slasher with a female villain, which is absolutely wicked, called Cougar.
Oh my God.
But yeah, so it was weird. It's like, oh, existential truth, up a volcano, making movies with Werner, and then like straight back into pitching sales agents and be like, yeah, no, I think the market for this is like really
oh God
commercial. It's like, the duality.
Yes. Yes.
But I'm here now, and I'm excited.
You're here now.
Arachnophobia, which
oh my God.
Yeah, funnily enough, I still enjoy this film, but my enjoyment of it has really shifted from childhood to now. So I'm excited to talk about it.
I love that. Well, yeah, let's get into that in a minute. And I want to start off just by asking you, and actually your Werner experience in a way is quite a nice segue, because I was going to ask you, like, generally, how are you at kind of being like, are you a very outdoorsy person? Are you good being like out there with the elements in nature, and that kind of thing?
I grew up in Tennessee, and I grew up camping and all that kind of stuff. And amongst people who are outdoors types, I would be considered average.
Yeah.
But when I have lived in LA and New York and London, I would say I am extremely outdoorsy compared to the population there. Like yeah, I mean I've camped somewhere in the middle of nowhere with a me-made tent, and in the morning some cougars literally walked past our camp, and we had to reach for a rifle in the back of the truck to make sure that they wouldn't circle back because there were some babies with her. But yeah, so like, to me, I'm like mid, but depending on the audience, I would say yes, quite outdoorsy. But this is actually too, this is a huge part of this film for me, because I grew up in, like I said, grew up in Tennessee, where there are many spiders that can kill you in Tennessee. It's sort of a luck of the draw situation, and I'll get into that and the specifics of that later. But yeah, I would say on Miranda Priestley to Bear Grylls, I'm a sort of like 6.
Okay,
maybe.
That's good. Yeah, and do you have many? Are you an arachnophobic yourself, Jen? Like, what's your relationship with spiders? Because I mean, it feels like 90% of the population seems to have some level of arachnophobia, right? Like, what's your take on it?
Absolutely, and this is one of the things that has changed for me over time. As a kid in America, I had what I considered a very healthy fear of spiders, because they literally could kill you where I was, and they were all over the place. And it's we had particularly a kind of spider called a brown recluse, and they're quite upsetting because they hide in closets. Like, they're a recluse, they hide in the dark, they like dark mid-temp spaces. And one year my school was refurbishing the storage space under the stage, and a nest of these things was found, and it got disturbed, and they sort of went all over the auditorium. And in that event, I got bit by a brown recluse on my leg. And Ooh. Not only does it really ache, it doesn't hurt like a burn or a pinch. It aches, like really, really painful ache. And I lost about like a 10 pence chunk of muscle out of my calf as a result. So it's mostly grown back, but I've got one of those party tricks where you can push like unreasonably far into your body at that part. So it's like So, I started off reasonably terrified. I had a film set that ended up being infested with black widows, or a black widow at least, at one point, because they're more solitary. But and then I moved to England, and England is like the arachnophobes' paradise. There are no spiders here that can hurt you at all. Even like your mock widows and that kind of stuff. Like it might sting like a hornet if you're allergic, if you get like a really bad one. But there's literally I can garden glove free and not worry about death. And snakes are part of that as well, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But since I came here though, when I was working on the film Prevenge, we have the reptile store at the beginning, and that's a
Yes.
place in Cardiff. And we needed to source some sheds from tarantulas for the film. And this lovely chap, Charlie Brigden, talking to them, I found out about this thing, which is basically an annual beauty pageant for the best tarantula. It's like Crufts for spiders. And it happens, I think, in Warwickshire usually, but it's annual. And they let me come film there one year, and I grew to love the little buggers because when it's a whole culture of collectors who really care for these things. And so that was one of the things that really shifted for me about watching this film is, I'm sure they did the best they could. And there's messages about it saying that no animals were harmed, but there is absolutely no way those spiders weren't harmed, at least a little bit. You're not even supposed to handle the things. They're like eggs. There's something called arboreal and terrestrial tarantulas, and arboreals are the ones that live in the trees. And literally, if it falls from a meter high, it will just crack like an egg. And so, whereas growing up, I watched this film, and I think I talked with you about it and my terror of clowns and whether it came before or after the film. Like arachnophobia was as frightening for me as it was when I was a kid. And now watching it, and maybe again, this is because I recently watched The Substance, but now watching it, it was such a romp. It was so much fun, actually. I didn't actually feel frightened. I felt a delightful tension, but I didn't actually feel like I was in danger or like I would, be nervous coming out of it afterwards. And I love that. I miss horror films like that, man. I want more of those.
Yeah, the kind of like Amblin sort of Spielberg produced PG sort of fun but scary horror, right? Like it feels like that was so much of its time.
Well, exactly. And I think that's pretty much exactly how they saw this film as they were making it. Like directed by Frank Marshall, who had been producing for Spielberg and knew what this, like, they knew the vibe. They very much knew what the vibe was. By the way, I watching the opening for this, I was reminded of another, childhood favorite film. And I just really felt, I was like, man, you know what? The opening of this is so parallel to the opening of Congo. And lo and behold, I hadn't realized it's the same director. Frank Marshall directed both Congo and Arachnophobia. And I think that explains some, like, this is this guy's thing. He nails it. He absolutely nails the sort of almost camp, but like, sort of pantomime horror adventure, like really sort of dime store adventure-y tone, if that makes sense. Like,
completely agree. I loved this movie, and we'll get into the specifics in a minute. But I want to ask you about spiders on film generally as well, because I feel like I've been doing this series on kind of animal attacks and nature for like 20 weeks. This is the first spider movie I've actually covered. Like, there are like shark movies are a dime a dozen, alligator movies, snake movies. It feels like, considering how many of us are scared of spiders, it feels like there's a bit of a lack of horror movies about spiders. Like, why do you think that is?
Absolutely. I think it's purely commercial reasons. I think it's practicality. I think that the reason spiders are scary to us is that they actually they move through I'm trying to remember the word for it. It's like liquid physics, sort of like they pump liquid through their legs, which makes their legs animate in this way. And someone smarter than me will remember the actual name of that. But they move in a way we consider uncanny, because we move through the contraction and extraction of muscles and tendons and this kind of thing. But they move in this very different way. And so part of that means that you can't just have a puppet spider, because a puppet spider doesn't move in the way that a real spider moves. And that's the thing that makes it freaky.
Yeah.
So to capture that movement, you're either doing digital, which again never quite works. I don't know if you've noticed this in films, but I always find purely digital spiders to just not have that same locomotion.
Yes.
Hydraulics, that's what it's called.
That's it.
Hydraulics. And so you have to have hydraulic puppets. You can't just have like hand animated or VFX puppets. They don't quite work because the physics isn't right. But secondly, this film is extremely clever in the way it executes this. It uses a mixture of puppets, live spiders. They say that the dead spiders died of natural causes and were brought in. I choose to believe them. I don't know whether or not I should, but I'm definitely choosing to live in the reality in which that's true.
Yeah.
So, it takes a really clever storyboarded process to make a spider look convincing. And so I think that's one of the real instances there have been spider horror films that used old digital spiders and they just don't hit the same. So we don't remember them.
It's so
but yeah,
true.
so I think it's logistic, because spiders are uncanny the world over. There is not a culture that doesn't have some mythology around spiders. And I think they just don't film brilliantly, ultimately.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I, because of the reasons you said, I never really saw myself as an arachnophobic. Like, I'm pretty good. In my house, I'm the one that gets rid of the spiders. If there's giant spiders, like house spiders, I'm pretty good at just like getting them under a glass, taking them outside. So generally, I'm fine with them. But I do find there's something, this movie did freak me out to the point where I was like, am I more scared of spiders than I thought? Like, I was actually kind of like convulsing in my sofa rewatching this film this week at the moments when the spiders kind of drop out of a lampshade onto somebody or leap at somebody. Again, there is just something, it's like something innate in our brains that knows these things are not necessarily good for us, right? Like these creatures.
It really is. I think it's uncanniness. I think it is the fact that it doesn't move like we expect things to move, and it triggers our startle response. So it literally is all of that. It ticks all of the boxes for being primordially frightening, as it were. And I think Spielberg and Marshall really nail exploring those traits of the spider. Like they do a lot of like backlit shadows and letting it just crawl across things. And I will say, in this watch, my thank you Blu-ray moment was seeing the monofilament that's clearly been attached to the spider to keep it on a track, and it made me go off and do some reading about it. And the claim is that they used wax to attach the lines. And again, they said it doesn't bother them. I'm going to choose to believe that. I don't know whether or not I should, but again, I choose to live in reality where all of those spiders were paid equity minimum and they're all living really happily on their ranch houses with their tiny spiderlings, which is actually what baby spiders are called. They're called spiderlings, which is shortened to slings. So all the little slings.
Yes, slings.
Yeah, so.
Again, adorable until you see those YouTube videos where somebody like pokes the nest of them and like 1,000 of them come crawling out.
That's
all
the
over
thing,
the
isn't it?
ceiling.
It's uncanny. It's not that it's actually because the idea of loads of particles dispersing. What makes a dandelion beautiful, but a flock of spiderlings dispersing terrifying. It's just the uncanniness. It's just because it doesn't move like we expect a living thing to move, and as human animals, when we see that, we want to kill it with fire. And that's just innate in our hardwiring.
Absolutely. And I think the genius of this film, and again, something that we haven't seen a lot of, is that they keep those spiders small and they look like house spiders, right, for the most part. And again, I think of other spider movies, whether it's Eight-Legged Freaks or whatever, like giant alien spiders tend to be more the thing, right? But again, like, keep them small, keep them familiar looking. I think that's so much much scarier, you know?
Well, absolutely. And I think, again, it comes back to technical reasons. You know, when you're trying to make something that is an inch tall frightening to human beings who could step on it and crush it.
Yeah.
You know, it's that whole, it's almost like, you know, in found footage where they say, well, why don't they just drop the camera and run? Why don't they just step on them?
Yes.
And I think that that's something that the filmmakers make really clear in this film. There is a number of these animals and they are fast. And between those two factors, they justify that you can't simply kill one and succeed, which I really, but I mean, honestly, there's that fantastic scene in the bathroom where they're sort of, it really does look like they're being pushed through the doorknob the spiders are crawling through the doorknob to get into the bathroom. And it's hokey, but I still totally buy it. Like, I still totally believe it within the world of the film. And I think that's execution dependent. You know, I think you could take that scene and have it done by 1,000 other people and have it be done wrong.
Completely agree. So let's get into the movie in depth. Let's begin with a little, it's a nice simple plot, right, Jem? But just give us a little brief plot synopsis of what happens in Arachnophobia.
So, love a high concept movie. An entomologist goes to South America, and I think they actually filmed in Venezuela, to study some rare breeds of arachnid. And I love this. They use the old, this particular area has been out of human observation for millions of years. And these species are like definitely different. So anything that's not accurate about them, you can't call us out on because these are different spiders. And when one member of the team is inevitably killed by one of the spiders, and actually I love they set it up as revenge. The spider kills him out of revenge. So this is actually a revenge movie. And unwittingly they ship back his corpse, housing the vengeful spider, who makes its home in a sleepy American town where Jeff Daniels, got that right, not Bill Pullman, Jeff Daniels.
Very easily confused, those two, aren't they, for some reason?
Dude, the time in my life that I've spent not being sure who's who. That Jeff Daniels has arrived in this sleepy town to be a new doctor. Him and his stockbroker wife, who've moved from the big city because it was just too much for them. So he settles in, but unfortunately the old doctor reneges on his agreement to move out. And Jeff takes on a single elderly female patient to make it through. Unfortunately, she dies from a spider bite, which no one believes possible. And so a series of people Jeff is taking care of end up dying one at a time, all to spiders in sheer coincidence. And the town begins to turn on Jeff until ultimately the exterminator arrives in the form of John Goodman in one of his finest character performances.
He's got an amazing jingle as well that kind of accompanies him whenever he's on screen. It's amazing. His
whole character is outstanding, and I really wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that dialogue is improv. And the reason I say that is there's a moment late towards the end when he's in the car with one of the scientists or sidekick or someone, and he says something, in the region of Benelux, they call it. Now, here's the thing. Benelux is in the film industry how a region referred to. It's Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. I don't think that's used anywhere else in the world. And I think John Goodman was just outside of the film industry. And I think John Goodman was just riffing lines and Benelux came out and they decided to leave it in. Yeah. So I feel like I would love to compare the script to screen and see how much of that he was just bringing to the party. But yeah, so John Goodman shows up and we realize that there is a spider infestation, and the entomologist shows up and agrees that yes, actually this is quite bad. And then there is an ultimate showdown against the spiders, and it's amazing. It's absolutely they really pull out all the stops, and it's an absolute treat. And I feel like even if you haven't seen it, you can still go watch it and enjoy it, because let's be honest, the narrative is not the key point of this film.
Absolutely. You're there for the spider horror, for some of those amazing set pieces. So you touched upon this already, Jem, but just tell us your history with this film. So was this a favorite of yours when you were a kid?
So I loved it as a kid. I think it was one of the ones we had on VHS, but it was also, it played on American television a lot. So it was one that it would come on and you'd watch it. And I think it has that classic watchability. entirely. I think it's characters you enjoy spending time with. The visuals are interesting. The performances are fantastic. They're never off key. So yeah, it was definitely, it's kind of in line with like The Burbs and Monster Squad and all of these sort of
kind of gateway horror, right?
Exactly, like scary, I guess cozy horror in a way, like scary but not too scary stuff that was readily available for a human being my age in that era.
Yeah, completely agree. It was a big favorite of mine growing up. Rented it at my local video store, kind of became obsessed with it. Like very much a kind of like early horror experience for me, this movie, because it is, like you said, it's a hard thing to balance this. It really perfectly balances that tone, doesn't it, of kind of slightly goofy comedy for fun for all the family and genuine real horror, like that body in the coffin at the beginning that gets like eaten and its blood drained there's some pretty nasty stuff in this too, Well,
it's nasty in that it confronts us with death, but it's not cruel. Like, it's not watching him we don't see him be in pain for more than a few seconds. We don't see, I think the most harrowing bit is when the town, the original town doctor dies and his wife is in the room with him. He thinks he's having a heart, and it sort of prolongs that a little bit. But generally, the horror in this comes from the tension in the buildup of will the spider attack, and then the discovery of the aftermath of what has happened following the spider's attack. And I think that's part of what keeps it light. Like, we're not seeing people in pain. We are anticipating them being in pain or being harmed. And then we're seeing the aftermath of it. But we're not actually seeing the pain manifest on screen very much anyway.
Absolutely. And I think there's something nice. Obviously, you mentioned we get that lovely opening sequence where they're like out in Venezuela. But I think what's really nice is that they then take the horror home, don't they? It would have been a very different film if the whole film had been set like in the jungle, essentially. And we've seen plenty of movies like that. But I think there's something about, bringing it back to familiar settings, to people in their shower and their toilet or on their sofa, putting their feet in their slippers and that kind of thing, right? It like suddenly brings the horror home, makes it very relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's sort of, for better or for worse, there's this sort of exoticizing of this creature. It is almost treated like an alien invasion in that sense. God bless the people of Venezuela for how they're depicted in this film, and all of my apologies to them. But the idea is that it's literally come from the canopy of this, I think they may actually say millions of years remote, excluded valley. And so they literally come from the heavens like aliens. Then they're, transported into this podunk cornfield town. So it really kind of, you could definitely make a case for it being an alien invasion film in that sense.
For sure. And I think you're right, the depiction of Venezuela, you always get these kind of slight stereotypes in these types of movies. But I think also it does do something that so many of these movies I've explored so far have. Actually, we talked about it a lot with Grizzly Man. The kind of the arrogance of the white man going where he shouldn't go as well, right? Because there is a moment when the locals are like, we don't go any further. No, thank you, and again, like the Julian Sands, God bless Julian Sands, right? As Dr. James Atherton, who is so good in this movie, as well as this kind of stern, scary, arrogant white man, right? Like he's so good in this movie.
I love him in this, and it's he. Like, looking like he wound up looking for the next, 40 years in this movie. Like, he very, very deeply carrying that same look all the way through. But also, there was a movie he did around the same time called Vibes, in which he is also a scientist who has reason. It's co-starring Cyndi Lauper and Jeff Goldblum and the incredible Peter Falk as well. I highly recommend people watch this. It's the same kind of vibe, but it's an action sci-fi film in which Cyndi Lauper is a psychic, and so is Jeff Goldblum, and Julian Sands and Peter Falk are in in a time-restricted battle to see who can use their powers to conjure something out of the Colombian mountains faster. But deeply the same thing. Forgive the pun, deeply the same vibes. But Julian Sand was rocking this character in all of these films. Like this sort of highly colonial, too posh to love, one-minded, and then actually talking about Frank Marshall in Congo again, it's exactly the same thing that what's his name who played Frankenfurter?
Tim Curry.
Tim Curry, thank you. It's exactly the role that Tim Curry plays in Frank Marshall's later film Congo, is this sort of colonial, too posh to hate, single-minded, only in it for himself kind of man. But yeah, absolutely brilliant character. I think, they open the film, these characters, but really they're really supporting cast. We don't see them for 2/3 of the film, really. And the casting is just so clever. It just really, really is.
The casting is amazing, and then you're right. You get this kind of opening sequence in the rainforest, and then we go back to our little small American town filled with its very kind of small American town inhabitants, right? And you talk about the kind of invasion of this kind of outside creature. That is kind of also there in Jeff Daniels and his family, right? Because they're from the big city and
from the big city,
from the big smoke, and they're from San Francisco, and the small town folk do not take kindly to Jeff Daniels' character, right? And his attitudes. But yeah, what do you think of Jeff Daniels? Again, a man I so fully associate with this era of the 90s, like you said.
I really enjoy him. I think he plays at his best when he finds himself in a society that he doesn't fit in. And, he's also like deeply likable. There's not really any way to dislike him. Even a lot of the stuff he does now, like Newsroom. Yeah. I think they cast him because even though his character does some really objectionable things, you still find him engaging and charming. And it's stuff like, I just remember films like The Butcher's Wife and, even Dumb and Dumber in that way. Like he's always as this sort of outsider, a really convincing and interesting character. But
I always think of him in Speed as well, and that kind of like he's that kind of like grizzled, slightly grumpy, slightly dry character who also happens to be quite like warm-hearted at the same time. And I think there's a bit of that here in this, isn't there? Like he has this quite kind of dark, dry humor sometimes, the way he talks about some of the other characters that live in this town. He kind of makes jokes about them dying and that kind of thing, but also like he's our hero, he's our all-round good guy at the same time,
Absolutely, like really identifiable, really everyman, but still on the outside, and he plays that just really, really well. Like he's sort of the he's almost like the Cassandra in a lot of films where he tells society what the deal is, but nobody listens to him.
Yeah, exactly that. And of course, like Frank Marshall talked about how this movie, he wanted it to be reminiscent of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, of course, as well. And I think there is that feeling like this kind of small town filled with these slightly kooky characters, right, that come under attack. And I love the whole cast, right, this whole ensemble cast.
So good.
the other kind of town doctor, the mortician and his wife, like all of these other supporting characters are just brilliant.
It honestly, the casting of this film is so clever and so spot on, and it's filled with a load of like absolutely delightful character cast and just really talented individuals. That's what kind of makes the film sing. It isn't a film that's based on its narrative. Like its narrative is really straightforward, and if it had been executed differently, it could have gone a very different way. But the way that this ensemble sort of bounces the story from one another is really special. It's it reminds me a lot of Jaws in that sense. It's so much about how the characters play off each other and just their looks and how the editor put that all together, that's really where the joy is in this film.
Absolutely. You can kind of see the through line of The Birds to Jaws to this in a way, and obviously kind of Spielberg kind of being a bit of a through line there for sure. It has that same kind of tone, that kind of fun romp, but isn't afraid to hold back on the scares when it wants to as well. And of course, like, Jeff Daniels' character Ross Jennings is our titular arachnophobic, right, as well. Like,
Yes.
he tells this story about when he was basically a 2-year-old and he froze up in fear when a spider crawled up his body. And again, I love that about it. Like, it's kind of over the top, but I sort of buy it. I sort of buy that feeling of, like, every muscle in your body freezing because you're that terrified by something like that, the way that that stays with you, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's absolutely coincidence city. Like, it's very ridiculous that they should have all of this terrible luck befall them just if they've made this huge choice to move to a new city. And they looked at a number of cities. The script is very clear on that point. But yeah, so it's, you know, I think that's one of the reasons I can't say this is a film that's about its script too much, because the script is beyond belief. Like, the script does not engage willing suspension of disbelief, because all of this stuff has to happen on top of each other. But it doesn't matter. It's okay for that to just be fun, as long as there's other elements that really bring it. And I think they do. The evolution of this in the context of horror films, I don't know if you've talked about The Swarm yet in this context.
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
Because I think that is also responsible for the making of this, because I think it's almost a counterpoint. It's a much more dramatic film, and in many ways much more of a melodrama. And I think maybe, you know, I would imagine these filmmakers watched that film and thought, well, we're not going to take it that direction because that's too fine a line to walk. We're going to take it the fun, campy, you know, scary for kids direction. And, you know, I think it's that problem. It's, you can't have tiny villains and expect them to be really frightening on a huge screen with people who could squish them. It's, you have to play with it. And I think Frank Marshall said something about how he wants people to laugh and scream like they're on a roller coaster, but that he doesn't want them to shrink in fear. He wants them to delight with it. And I think that's really the key here.
Yeah.
I think that's what makes this work.
What do you think then of, like, the way in which they kind of put this spider horror on screen? Like, obviously they're using a mix here of real spiders. Every now and then you might get a bit of puppetry and, like, practical effects, right, as well. We hope that there weren't too many spiders harmed in the making of this, of course, right? Yeah. But I think apparently they used over 300 Avondale spiders from New Zealand, who are, those sorts of spiders are known for their large size. They look quite scary, but they're harmless to humans, basically. So they used a whole bunch of those in order to kind of put these spiders on screen. But yeah, how do you kind of find those spidery set pieces, I suppose?
I think they were really clever. I imagine this was storyboarded within an inch of its life, and that all of the effects were prepared to match those storyboards. I think it works really well. I think even when some of the puppets feel like the movement is wrong, like there's some spider legs that very clearly look like fingers or sort of something like that at certain points of the film. Yeah. I think we go with it, because I think we do accept the suspension of disbelief as far as that's concerned, and they show us real spiders often enough that, you know, that language is established, and we're happy to go with it. I think spider webs are a fantastic tool in horror films because they're so easy to create, and then also they are just genuinely upsetting. Like, you can't watch when Jeff Daniels, you know, he's like, oh, immersion therapy, I'm going to go up there, and then the ladder breaks and he ends up in a tangle of spider web. Yeah, it is just a horrible sensation, right? And I think that's another one for the primordial responses. But
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it's something it's why this film really, really works, is they nail the language of filming the spiders and the spiders' movement. And it's, I even, you know, they do these great little close-ups of the spider's face, which, by the way, I'm now in love with spider faces since jumping spiders became, you know, in the fold a couple years ago. So that I don't find the close-up of the face scary like I once did. I find it adorable. But they do these tremendous close-ups of the face to indicate that the spider is plotting revenge. And it makes sense. Like, you get it. That language is very clear. And so I think the technicals on this film are absolutely spot on. I think I can imagine they knew exactly what they were doing going in, and they did it. And that's what it looks like.
And, you know, for better or worse, we do villainize spiders, right? Like in storytelling, this is something I found fascinating that I've talked about throughout this whole series, that storytellers throughout history have portrayed certain species in different ways, right? The dog is usually the good, loyal one. The cat could be slightly more conniving and scheming, right? And smart, like the wily fox. And then you get like snakes that are always inherently evil, right? That are linked with the devil and the serpent and all that kind of, I know. And it's all so unfair, really. And it's true, I think spiders, because of the way our brains feel about them, they are often considered a scary, scary threat in storytelling as well, right? But of course, spiders are amazing for our planet, right? They're the best things to have in your house or in your garden for the most part, you know? Yeah.
They tidy up, they keep pests at bay, they help pollinators by limiting competitors' population. They're fantastic little beasties, and they're really quite lovely. And there's actually, you know, some people would certainly disagree with this, but there are some people who keep them who really feel they have personalities and sentience and engagement and that they have a really like a friendship or, you know, a camaraderie with the creature. I don't know whether that's true or not, but they're certainly, you know, sentient enough that can be projected onto them.
Yeah, and they're sort of amazing to watch. Like, you know, when you catch a glimpse of a spider, you know, actually like catching a fly in its web and doing all of its creepy shit where it wraps it up and everything. And it is like, it's kind of mesmerizing to watch, you know?
Well, and it's, you know, it's sort of, and again, it feels creepy because of the uncanny movement, the speed at which it occurs as well, I think, because it does happen very, very quickly. And that makes us feel that uncanniness as well. But it's also, you know, if you imagine it set to Mozart, or you know, some beautiful piece of pastoral music with the sun glinting off it, you know, if you give them a little bit better PR, it's quite skilled and beautiful, and yes, they are wrapping up a fly for their dinner, but it's they're quite special creatures, and I'm glad they're getting slightly better press these days than they used to.
Yeah, exactly. This is the problem with these animal attack movies. It happened after Jaws that a lot of kind of animal activists were like, stop portraying sharks like this. Like, they're not going to do these things. Don't go out there and try and kill them because you think they're a threat. Like, leave them be, you know? It's so silly.
Oh, and I am, and it must have been from Jaws, because I grew up thinking sharks were in a pool for most of my life. Like, I have deep issues with being in water that I can't see all of it at once.
Yes.
And, I mean, I grew up swimming in lakes as well and had some unpleasant experience with poisonous snakes, but I was still more frightened of sharks for whatever reason. I mean, I think we all know the reason. But yeah, it wasn't until I was in my 30s, really, that I learned that sharks are not actually that aggressive, and that unless they're hungry, triggered, or defensive, then it'll mostly just leave you alone. As long as you don't splash about and act like food, they're not that bothered. They're sort of like the Roombas of the sea. They really only go where they're attracted by things that they're by doing their job. They're just doing their job, and their job is to eat stuff.
I love that. I love the Roombas of the sea. That's good. That makes them sound a lot less scary. I like that.
Yeah, they're just doing their job.
Yes, they're just doing their job. So obviously these little beastie spiders throughout the film are killing different people around this town, and they slowly start to realize that, like, the geography of where these spider attacks are happening, that it turns out that they're sort of drone spiders, right? They're like worker spiders that are killing things and killing people, bringing stuff back to their big queen bee spider, their general, essentially, which they didn't
leave swarm entirely behind. They still kept the colony of a bee dynamic. Yeah,
it's so good. So then, of course, it turns out that this nest where the big giant evil spider lives is, of course, in Jeff Daniels' house. But I that moment towards the end when he realizes the nest is in his house and he arrives back to his family's home and they're all just having dinner, watching TV, and suddenly the room becomes swarmed with spiders. It's so good, isn't it? It's terrifying.
It's so ingrained in us to be like, like, no, run, like it's just right there, and you know, the indignity that the nest is not just in Jeff Daniels' house, it's in his wine cellar, the representation of his bougie ass lifestyle that he left behind in San Francisco. His only safe place, his only joy is being taken over by the arachnids.
Oh, God, grim. You know it as soon as they're like, it needs to be a cool, dark, moist space. It's like, oh shit, it's
he
the
didn't
wine
know it. He should have known it much faster.
Yeah, it's the bougie wine cellar. Of course it is, yeah. And then, of course, finally you get this showdown between Jeff Daniels and the big spider, right? The general, which is so good.
And yeah, they really, the choreography on that scene is super clever. And the way that they set up this spider walking, Jeff is laying down prone, and the spider is walking up his body sort of like a Bond villain laser. and they very cleverly placed this strap of wooden debris across his chest that as an audience member, you might think, I think maybe you clock it a little bit as being like, oh, why doesn't he just move that piece of wood? Yep. There's a little bit of that. It's not a perfect gesture, but like, how else do you stage that? Like, the staging of that is really hard because once the spider's on him, either he brushes it off or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, then how does he survive? And they just came up with this fantastic, well, why doesn't he have a piece of wood across him that he like smacks it and it catapults the spider into the fire? And it's like good. Genius, like really clever blocking. And again, it'd be cool to see if that was in the script or if that's something that they came up with in development and blocking. They obviously had to know before the day. It wasn't improv, but it feels like something that comes out of rehearsals and talking to special effects artists and that kind of thing. It feels like something that was done in the work process, which is really cool. Absolutely.
And the queen spider, the general spider, like these are the ones that are harder to pull off realistically, of course, because they're fucking huge, right? They're like, this is where we're at like alien-sized spiders. And I think they do a really good job of kind of showing you enough and not too much. Like, there's that sequence where he doesn't know where in the basement it is and he can just hear it scuttling and he's following the noise, right? And the sound design is absolutely incredible in this film, I think. And that is a really scary scene, I think, when it eventually leaps out of the pipe. It's a very xenomorph face hugger type sequence, that, isn't it?
It's the movement, though. And I think that's actually the wrong way around. I think xenomorphs, the face huggers, are very spider-like.
Absolutely.
I think they were based on spiders. I'm gonna really upset you, Mike, and let you know that those spiders are not unrealistically large. The Goliath bird-eating tarantula is about a foot leg span. So
my God. No.
I can't remember. I really think that a lot of those two main spiders were actually real, and I think in my research I found that, but it's escaping me now. But if I bring it back, I'll name the stars, but yeah, sorry to upset you, but the size of your head is the size of a Goliath bird-eating tarantula, and I don't even think they were that big in this.
No, that's true.
I think they were sort of like half-headed size. They were sort of this big.
Fucking hell. Yeah.
But yeah, and these are the ones that I'm talking about when I say these arboreal ones that are fragile like an egg. So, the idea of it leaping out of a tree to capture you, it wouldn't do that. It's too dangerous.
Yeah.
It couldn't risk that to capture its prey. It uses webs and other things. But we, I think if they had depicted humans being trapped in a web in this film, it would have all fallen apart.
Yes.
I don't think we would have bought that for a minute. So they had to come up with this giant, jumping, poisonous, kills you in an instant baddie.
It's good. For the sound effects of the spiders crawling through the duct, long fingernails were used on pieces of tin, apparently, to create the kind of scurrying sound. And apparently for the sound effect of spiders being crushed, Foley artists stepped on mustard packages and potato chips as well. So getting that kind of squishy, crushing noise.
And I think, too, that's one of those things that, do you know what the sound of a giant spider being crushed sounds like?
Right.
No. Like, you know what it sounds like when somebody's walking through leaves, but you don't know what it sounds like when a giant alien spider gets crushed. Yeah. And I love that the filmmakers got to invent those kind of things, because they can really give the audience an experience in that way, because it has no expectations. It's being invented, which is really a delightful thing to play with in horror films.
And we get the lovely kind of happy ending. They defeat the spiders, and then they decide they're going to go back to San Francisco. And I love that little end sting of, like, again, something we've looked at a lot throughout this whole series is wherever you are, nature could fuck you up, right? And you've got these kind of the San Francisco earthquakes occurring in that very end of the film as well, which I love.
It's definitely letting them know that nature is the big boy. boy. And, you know, God, we could do with remembering that. It's, I think we have deeply as a society forgotten that we are guests on this planet, and it's not great. Like I sit here looking out my window, and I'm looking at a London street with some London oaks lining it, and it's all asphalted over. And I just keep thinking about the fact that 100 years ago, these trees would be getting water from all of this area, but now because it's covered in asphalt, they're not. And they're getting it changes everything in the root structure. It's absolutely bonkers. Everywhere we have plopped ourselves down, we are absolutely destroying this place. And you know, there's no plan for the alternative. So I hope maybe, you know, there's not been, have you come across a really good like flora rather, revenge movie? Because there's The Ruins, but that one's a little bit meh. Have you come across another one?
Yeah, they're a bit hokey. They're a bit hokey, aren't they? The Ruins, M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening. Like
Killer
they are. It's hard. Yeah. It's in the wind. It's hard to make plants scary in horror films.
Obviously, Little Shop of Horrors, but that's an alien plant, so it's not really what I'm talking about.
Exactly. It's hard to get right, I think, in
Day
that
of the
regard.
Triffids,
So, whereas with spiders, I think there's just something innately, psychologically in us, right, that just says, nope. And speaking of, before we wrap up this half of the discussion, I want to head on over to this month's Wild About Horror, because Freudian cinephile Mary Wild has plenty of thoughts on Frank Marshall's Arachnophobia.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild here, with some thoughts on Frank Marshall's horror comedy film Arachnophobia, about Ross Jennings, a general practitioner who moves with his family from San Francisco to a small California town, only to discover a unique problem. A deadly species of spider has infiltrated the area. The trouble begins when a tropical spider from South America accidentally gets shipped to the town, where it breeds with a local spider species. The offspring inherit the deadly traits of their tropical parent, leading to a series of bizarre and deadly incidents as the spiders begin to attack the residents. The body count rises, and Ross, who has a deep-seated fear of spiders, must confront his arachnophobia and work alongside an exterminator to eradicate the spider threat before it overwhelms the region. The film blends humor with genuine tension, culminating in a final showdown between Ross and the killer spiders. Freud's theories suggest that phobias can arise from repressed, unresolved conflicts that are projected onto a specific object or situation. Ross's arachnophobia could symbolize deeper fears about control, vulnerability, or inadequacy, particularly as he faces the challenges of establishing his medical practice in a rural location. As Ross confronts his trepidations, he may also be engaging with hidden worries about his identity, family responsibilities, and his role within the community. The film plays with the concept of the uncanny, where ordinary homely settings become sources of terror due to the invasion of an unexpected threat. This shift from safety to danger reflects concern about the familiar becoming strange, which can evoke deep-seated dread about one's environment and personal safety. The invasion of spiders into the home can be interpreted as a metaphor for external threats to the family unit, provoking fears about safety and protection of the body. The fear of spiders can be seen as a redirection of unconscious nervousness in an unknown setting. Instead of confronting broader life changes, Ross channels his anxiety into a phobia of spiders, which provides a tangible focus for his emotional distress. This process is called displacement, It occurs when emotional impulses are transmitted from their original target to a safer, more manageable substitute target. The motif can also be viewed as a defense against the destabilizing feelings associated with Ross's transition to a new life. Rather than confronting deeper insecurities about his competence, he fixates on the outwardly threat of the spiders, which externalizes his internal conflict. Ross refers to a traumatic incident from his early childhood, his first memory involving a spider crawling on him while he was in his crib. The moment highlights the lasting impact of early experiences, suggesting that unresolved fears can resurface later in life. Indeed, repressed childhood traumas can turn into irrational fears in adulthood. Ross's vivid recollection underscores how this initial traumatic encounter has shaped his psyche and contributed to his ongoing maladaptive response. Ross describes a feeling of paralysis during the spider incident when he was a baby, indicating an overwhelming sense of helplessness. When faced with an uncontrollable situation, the mind may resort to freezing as a coping response. Ross describes the spider as an alien thing, emphasizing the sense of otherness and fear associated with it. This can represent aspects of oneself that are foreign or threatening. The spider's intrusion into his personal space serves as a metaphor for the fear of losing control over one's body and identity, highlighting the tension between the self and external dangers. Ross's fear of spiders reflects a deeper anxiety about safety in his life. The inability to protect himself from the spider parallels a more general fear of inadequacy and the lack of mastery over ecological circumstances. The spread of spiders in the small town disrupts the familiar, safe environment of suburban life. This reflects a universal concern about perceived exotic forces of the natural world as intruding on valued personal space inside man-made civilization. The film cleverly uses the spider as a symbol of these existential fears. We project our discomfort upon nature. The spiders, as hidden threats that encroach on the characters' lives, can symbolize a sense of paranoia and the feeling of being constantly observed or judged. Ross's fear of spiders can reflect a deeper anxiety about surveillance, vulnerability, and the societal pressures he feels as he tries to establish himself in a new community. The film can also be seen as a representation of the transitional phases in life. Ross's journey through fear and ultimately confronting the spider threat parallels the psychological growth that comes from facing change directly. This process emphasizes the importance of navigating life's challenges to achieve personal development and resilience. Ross's acknowledgement of needing to work through his fear suggests an awareness of the therapeutic process. The film's dialogue reflects a desire to recognize and integrate his phobia rather than avoid it, indicating a step towards emotional healing. This aligns with the importance of play and exploration in clinical psychotherapy, allowing individuals to navigate their fears in a safe and supportive environment. Arachnophobia explores themes of fear, the unknown, and the fight against what lurks in the dark, all while maintaining a light-hearted tone that mixes comedy with horror. For Freud, humor is a way to mitigate anxiety. The funny scenes give both the characters and the audience a chance to process their fears without becoming overwhelmed. I keep thinking of the dialogue exchange in Venezuela early in the film between the British entomologist James Atherton and the American nature photographer Jerry Manley, where they say, quote, "Did you ever throw a large firecracker into a pond? What happens? All sorts of stuff float to the surface," end quote. The film Arachnophobia similarly serves a fantastic projective function, launching a feared object upon an unsuspecting, idyllic town and letting us see what rises to the surface. Until next time.
A big thank you to the brilliant Mary Wild. And don't forget, if you want to hear more from Mary, you can subscribe to her Patreon. That's patreon.com/Mary Wild. So, Jen, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you a final couple of questions about Arachnophobia. I mean, this film is it's 35 years old nearly at this point, right? How well do you think it holds up? Do you think this is still a horror film that would work on future generations as much as it would for us?
I mean, to me, it holds up deeply, but I find that you really have to talk to a younger audience to see how it holds up for them in modern context, because I grew up with this cinematic language. I grew up with films being made like this. I grew up with films made on film. I was having a conversation with a 25-year-old editor the other day, and we really disagreed on the impact of a digital effect on a shot. And the thing is, I don't think either of us are wrong. I think we just have completely different contexts for how we see that kind of shot used. And the syntax that we're used to is totally different. So I'd be very curious to hear what the young people make of it. But in my view, I think it holds up swimmingly. And I think if you've got nothing to do tonight and you want to get some popcorn and swing Jeff Bezos some money on Amazon, I think it's very worthwhile to spend your time that way.
Me too. I think it's still unmatched and unbeaten in terms of spider movies. Like, I don't think anyone has done it as well since, to be honest. I'm still waiting for the next, spider movie that we'll all say is as good as, if not better than, Arachnophobia, Yeah,
and I think it is that revenge aspect that, like, they give the spiders a motivation in this, and I think it's so hard to do that, to project emotion onto this kind of animal, it's difficult, but I'd love, I'm here for it. I'm here for Spider's Revenge.
Always. Well, Jen, thank you. My final question for you: what's your favorite movie in this subgenre? You've got some big hitters. You've got Jaws, The Birds, like many others that we've mentioned. Do you have a personal favorite?
You know what? It's one of those where I can't name one. Like, it's two devices. Like, Jaws is amazing for reasons. Even Anaconda's a great fun film. It's trashy, but it's huge fun. I wouldn't really want to leave anything out in the subgenre. I think too, you get, like, there's sort of almost thriller versions where you've got, like, The Ghost in the Darkness, which is the Val Kilmer movie, which isn't quite a horror, but like, if I can call that a horror, I think that's where I'd pin my badge, because that's a film that isn't, it's not traditionally popular, but it's one that I've gone back and watched, like, several times over. Yeah, man, it's a worthwhile subgenre. It's hard to do, and it's harder to do while being, kind to the co-star, to the animal co-stars. So yes. I'm a fan of it whenever it's been done in a way that the animal co-stars come out happy, I guess.
Completely agree. There you go. Amazing. Well, Jen, thank you so much. Always a joy to have you back on the podcast. And just remind people, where can they find Jen Handorf out there online, and anything that you've got coming up that you want to tell people about?
Absolutely. So I'm always available at jenniferhandorf.com, where you can find me for consulting or directing work, if you like. And then always available on at @jhandorf at Twitter, even though it's a hellscape, and Jen the Handorf on Instagram. And yeah, coming up, very excited about this feature. Hopefully be able to share that with you guys soon. And watch this space.
Amazing. Jen, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Before we move into the second half of this week's episode, I'm going to take a moment to thank our next 30 Kickstarter backers for helping us to create Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game. Final Cut, of course, now on sale via our website. Just head to evolutionofhorror.com/shop to pick up your card game based on the Evolution of Horror. If you're looking for Christmas presents, because it's getting to that time of year, right? This is a perfect little stocking filler game, perfect to share with friends, family. Anyone can play it of any age. You don't have to be into horror movies or know all about horror movies in order to play the game. It's a really fun card game just based around the horror genre. So if you want to pick up your copy, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. So I'm going to thank the next 30 of our 900 Kickstarter backers who helped us to make Final Cut a thing. A big thank you to Emily, Terry Curran, Chris Odger, Joel Finnis, Whitney Treple, Kat Davies, Andrew Casso, James Powell, Acid Soap, Kerry Johnson, Chris, Tracy Thompson, John Whitaker, Millie C, Victoria, Magnus Bergvist, Matthew Walker, Kadra Spencer, Nicola Owen, Roger Corsino, Bradley Lamb, Bastard Cafe, Tyler, Mark Hansen, Brian, Dan Cormos, Ian Smallman, Neil Hutchinson, Barry Newman, and Aaron Travis. A huge thank you to all of those people. And one more time, if you want to pick up your copy of Final Cut, the official Evolution of Horror card game, we do shop anywhere in the world. Head to our online store, evolutionofhorror.com/shop. Okay, let's hurtle into the second half of this week's episode as I'm joined by the brilliant Steph McKenna to discuss the one and only Tremors from 1990.
Perfection. A scorched outpost in the middle of nowhere.
You know how close I am to leaving this place right now? How close?
Maybe that's why Val and Earl decided to leave town.
Hey, hold up. That's Edgar Deems.
They just picked the wrong day to do it.
Jeez. You guys better get the hell out of here. There's a killer on the loose.
Who could be doing it?
Is that a snake?
I'll give you boys $5 for this.
20.
That's how they get you. They're under the ground.
Hello, Steph McKenna.
Ah, Mike Muncer, hello.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hello. I'm all right, thank you. I'm good. I've got my own beast sitting next to me. I've got Riley the dog, so we're ready to go to talk about some big worms. How are you?
Yes, I'm really good, thank you. October is slightly kicking my ass this month. I'm ready to sleep for like a month, I think, you know?
It's savage, isn't it? It's so exciting, but also just I can't even imagine how mad it must get for you. It must be just daily, just working 24/7.
Well, and also are you regretting this month signing up to be part of Team Fresh Blood earlier this year, Steph? Because October, right? There's a lot to get through. There's a lot to watch.
It is sort of it low-key panics me when I open the spreadsheet. It's intimidating, but it's a fun challenge at the same time, isn't it?
Exactly. It's fine. And like you say, we'll sleep in November. We'll sleep when we're dead. Whatever, you know.
That's what Christmas is for. I'm not interested in Christmas. So.
Exactly. So we are talking about nature horror films, kind of eco horror films and animal attack films and that kind of thing. Let me start off by just asking you your thoughts, Steph. Are you a fan of these types of horror movies generally?
I think it feels like a bit of a blind spot for me. I'm a fan of the biggies, obviously, Jaws and The Birds, even Arachnophobia, Cujo, all of that kind of thing. I wouldn't consider myself well watched in this area at all. I've seen the obvious ones. I know we've talked about, we'll talk about gateway horror a lot before, but there was definitely a sprinkling of films in the late 90s, early 2000s that I saw a lot of because they were, easily accessible on DVD or on TV. So like Lake Placid, Deep Blue Sea.
Yes.
They were birthed like in 1999. So watched them, had a big soft spot for them when I was a teenager. But also, when I think about it, nature attack films, they tend to be pretty fun, don't they? They're kind of... They're weirdly low stakes for me as a viewer because I don't find them too frightening. They feel more stressful and tense and kind of claustrophobic. So actually, they make a really good kind of fun group watch.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do this series, especially off the back of doing the really dark home invasion season. I was like, let's do something a little bit lighter, you know? I agree with you. It's I think that's part of the appeal of these movies, isn't it? Is that they're quite fun, especially to watch with other people, I feel like, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Really good to watch on like a Saturday night with some friends, with some popcorn, for sure. Definitely more than like a home invasion.
Oh my God.
Yeah, just, and I mean, I love the natural world, and, you know, I personally find a lot of comfort in the natural world, and, you know, it kind of does what it does. It carries on. What will be. You can't cheat it. You can never fully understand it. I really like that. I think the thing that freaks me out the most is like films like Picnic at Hanging Rock, where you've got something like ancient or primal about the landscape, or like even like The Lighthouse or something like that, where you've got that really sublime power of nature, and it has an impact on the psychology of the characters, and that really freaks me out, because it does tap into that idea of just nature being this awe-inspiring, awesome force that we will never be able to get a handle on.
Oh my God, do you think I could include The Lighthouse, Steph, in this series? I'd never thought about that. I love that.
Can you tack it on the end? Please tack it on the end. I'll come back. You can just talk about lighthouses and rocks and seagulls. Evil seagulls. That's nature attacks for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I never thought of that. I love that idea. I love that. So are you generally pretty good? I mean, you're sitting there with your lovely dog by your side right now as we record this, right? Are you much of an animal person, Steph? Or do you have any big irrational phobias or fears?
I was thinking about this earlier. I do not. I mean, I love animals, so I don't think I've got any phobias of like mammals or animals. I think sloths are pretty freaky with their, you know, when they kind of freeze and do the long arm thing. I don't like that. I'm not into that. But and also insect wise, I was listening to your chat with Rihanna the other day, so this is totally Rihanna's nightmare, but my mum was a lifelong lover and collector of like moths and butterflies, so I have loads in my house, like literally cabinets full. I've got 2 cabinets.
Oh my God, you're like Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs.
I am. Thanks so much. What a compliment. So I love them. I love all of that. However, I mean, I'm happy to share my house with a spider, but maybe not like a fat boy. And I definitely do not have time for wasps. We've had a chat before about my horrible experiences with wasps.
Steph, you told me a story once about something, and I've never gotten over it. I think I'm scarred by this story as much as you are. Tell us
live messaging.
Honestly, you were messaging me as it was happening. Tell us about what happened with you and some wasps.
So I was walking home from work. I was about 10 minutes away from work, and I had my hair down. I've got long hair, and I've got an undercut, like a small undercut at the back of my head, which is important. And I felt something sort of like bat my cheek, and I thought, I don't know, something, you know, a leaf or something's blown into me. And then I got this massive sharp pain on the back of my head, and I was like, wow, it was a wasp, you know, flew into the back of my head, stung me. Carried on walking, and then a few steps later I had another searing pain in the back of my head, and I realised the wasp had flown into my hair, got stuck in my undercut, and was just going bananas and just kept stinging my skull. It was stinging the back of my head, and I could not do anything about it because it was tied up in my hair as well. So I had to walk the 10 minutes home.
Fucking
I know. I was ringing my partner going, what do I do? There's a wasp like attached to my head. And I've never been stung by a wasp before. And what was freaking me out is I wasn't actually sure whether I was allergic or, you know, I was like, well, the stings are coming. I got to about 5 or 6 by the time I got to my front door. And I was thinking, if I am allergic, I am in huge trouble. And I had to knock on my neighbour's door. She was home working from home, and I was like, "Hi, nice to see you. Can you help me sort of surgically remove this wasp from the back of my skull?" And we had to sort of tip my hair upside down in the middle of the street, and it took her ages to get it out because it was so knotted in there. But my head was just a giant welt. It was horrible. And yeah,
there's a reason to shave your head if ever I've heard one. Like, just go bald.
Bad wasp. And I sort of feel slightly triggered every time I walk down that street now. And I thought, it could have been worse. So I thought, well, that will cure me of my. Once you face down your fear, that cures you of your phobia, doesn't it? It fucking doesn't. I am terrified of wasps now. Same with jellyfish. Actually, I got stung by a jellyfish when I was swimming the other year, and it really isn't that bad, and yet somehow it's made it so much worse, and I'm just so fraggled out by jellyfish now. It's just, I don't know what it is.
Steph, did you have to urinate on yourself after the jellyfish sting?
I managed to avoid that, although I was tempted to give it a try to see if is that a myth, or does it actually? I guess it works. Friends taught me it works.
I don't know. I mean, friends taught us that, didn't they? I don't know. I've got a feeling it's not actually completely medically accurate. That I don't know though.
I'm glad it wasn't like
I've never tried it myself.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't like the other way around with the wasp store, and I didn't have to go to my neighbour's house and ask her to wee on me. So
be like, yeah, on your head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. Well, I'm right there with you, Steph. Like, I love animals. All nature is great, of course, but why are wasps here? Why are they? I mean, what are they doing? What are they doing to this planet?
Bees
right?
make sense. Wasps, just fuckers, just horrible. There are plenty of other insects that, serve the same function as wasps and can pollinate. They do not need to exist.
Now, what about worms? Big worms, Steph. How do you feel about worms?
Big worms, little worms, Kevin Bacon's worm, big worm fan, big snaky wormy.
Big worm fan.
I'm a big worm fan, notoriously.
I was always creeped out by the story. I don't know how accurate this is, that if you cut a worm in half, it still just keeps moving as two worms. Is that a thing? Is that actually a true fact? I don't know.
I feel like that's true, and I also feel like I definitely did. I'm not a serial killer, I'm not Buffalo Bill, but I think I probably did do some worm dissections as a kid, just out of I've got vague memories of it. That's as far as my animal insect abuse goes, by the way. I'm not going any further, but yeah. I like worms. Worms are all right, aren't they? Do they repulse you?
No, I like them. I think they're quite cute, actually. I mean, at least the little ones, that we actually find in the... Yeah, exactly. I think they're fine. But we're going to talk about some giant, big, slightly scarier, slightly more dangerous worms. We're going to get into Tremors from 1990. What a picture. Steph, first of all, just set the scene for us. Tell us a little bit about Tremors, what it's all about.
This is a lot easier to summarise than most of the other films I've ever talked to you about on this podcast, to be honest. Tremors is set in the Sierra Nevada mountains in a tiny little town called Perfection, which is a lovely name. A town which only has 14 residents. It's tiny. And there are two guys, Val and Earl. They're working handyman jobs for their neighbours, and they really want to get out of town and make something better for themselves. And on their way out of hopefully escaping this tiny town, they discover the corpse of one of their fellow residents, Edgar Deems, on an electrical tower. And it turns out he's died of dehydration up on the tower, which seems very bizarre. And they think there might be a serial killer on the loose. But soon they discover that everyone is being hunted by massive phallic-shaped snake worm creatures that use vibrations to detect their victims. And worse still, they've been cut off from the outside road because of a rock slide, which is very unfortunate. And their phones have been cut off. So everyone has to band together to survive and somehow defeat them.
Exactly, yeah. It's a really fun little film, this film, directed by Ron Underwood, right? And it sparked like a massive franchise. But what's your kind of history with this original movie, Steph? Like, was this a first-time watch for you, or were you already familiar with it?
Oh, I've seen Tremors a few times. We've got it in the collection. I don't think I've watched it for like several years though, but I don't know anyone who dislikes Tremors. You can't dislike Tremors.
No. It's impossible to dislike.
It's just impossible to dislike. It's just hugely entertaining. And again, it's probably the first time I've talked about a film on this podcast that isn't massively polarising or massively disturbing. It's a nice, it's a nice mix of sort of Spielbergian storytelling, and then you've also got that kind of lo-fi 50s creature feature vibe, and it's got really satisfying tactile sort of practical elements and a bit of slapstick, and I think it's been funny to rewatch it this time, through the lens of trying to actually think a bit more seriously about this film beyond just giant penis worms. And it's actually a lot smarter than you would kind of originally give it credit for, isn't it? It's sort of it's kind of, it goes big in some respects with the massive monsters and the big school, but in others it's really, it's a simple premise. It's a tiny town which is cut off from the world. And it's just, that's the joy of this podcast, Mike, is that it makes you take the time to view things through a new lens. So I had a lot of fun rewatching it.
I agree. Last week I spent considerable time analysing Honey, I Shrunk the Kids like I was in some sort of film class. And, so it can be done. It can be done with any movie, I would say, Steph. And I agree with you. I think this film is so much fun. I completely agree with everything you just said. It's almost impossible to dislike this film. Who would dislike this film and why? It's so much fun. I think it's really well written. The characters are great. Kevin Bacon is really fun. Like, both of the leads are great. The practical effects, like you said, it's so tactile. It's so, like, the actual action set pieces are really great. I actually think the creature design is quite creepy and horrible as well, like in a really good way. And there's lots of deaths and carnage, but it's also really funny. Like, it's, I'm a fan of Tremors. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's inventive. It's quite, there's, a good amount of suspense and tension. Things evolve. It's pretty, and it's, do you know what? I had this vision in my, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but I had this kind of assumption going back into it that the two leads were maybe going to be a bit more like bordering on a bit more misogynistic maybe, or there'd be a few jokes that I'd be like, oh, that doesn't quite land. But it's not like that at all. So just good fun.
I was quite surprised by that. That stuff actually holds up really well, doesn't it?
For sure.
Think. Like, they have a really sweet relationship. In fact, if anything, I think these two should kiss at some point.
Oh my God.
They've got a very sweet relationship.
So glad you mentioned that, because I do think there's something brewing there, and I do think Rhonda's getting in the way of it.
Absolutely. It's borderline sort of Brokeback Mountain territory at the beginning, when the two of them are just like waking up together in the morning on the car.
That is the legacy of Tremors. There is Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think of it then? These two handymen, Val and Earl, right? Played by Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward. What do you think of these two as our leads?
Well, as you say, they're part brothers, part old married couple, and they're brilliant. I'd sort of misremembered them to a point. I'd kind of imagined they were a bit more bro-y than they actually are. Initially you've got Val, played by Kevin Bacon, who's that cocky youngster. He's obsessed with finding a really high maintenance blonde girlfriend with long legs in it. The film itself opens with him literally peeing off a cliff and then itching his arse. So there are some assumptions to be made there. And then you've got Earl, who played by Fred Ward, who is the older brother of the duo. He's the more sensible one, the one that's sort of trying to plan ahead and organise their situation better. He's the one that says they've got to set their heights a bit higher whilst cleaning out the cess tank. And I feel like Earl now would be played by John Bernthal in a remake.
Oh yeah, good. Yeah,
he's like,
definitely.
He's like B&M John Bernthal, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So, and they both aspire to something more. They're really trapped within their circumstances, aren't they? I mean, literally trapped because of the rockfall later, but also because, they don't have a lot of money. It's hard to get out of town. And I feel like Val tries to sort of polish over that a bit, doesn't he? By calling it sort of, the Hanneman Jobs' personal freedom, like it's a choice rather than a sort of circumstance. And as I say, Val, you kind of expect to be a sexist arsehole because he has that initial kind of like, this is what a woman needs to be. This is what I'm hoping for. But they both sort of evolve quite quickly for you as characters. Earl's really reliable and sort of protective, and he's sort of the uncle to a lot of people in the town, and he's not leery, and he keeps apologising for being uncouth and for swearing.
Yeah.
I really, it's funny, isn't it?
Do you think the film, I mean, maybe not, but do you think the film is in any way kind of exploring that kind of masculinity? I mean, the fact that the monster is a giant dick, right? It's a giant phallus. I wonder if there is any kind of exploration of masculinity in this film, with those two leads as well.
I think so, for sure. I mean, that is, let's give Tremors credit. And that is exactly what they were aiming to do, because these guys, especially Val, I think he learns pretty quickly, and those, they're... You expect something from those kind of traditional heroes in a sort of survivalist movie or a Western movie. And, this film has all of those elements. And you kind of know they're going to be the last guy standing, but it doesn't entirely unroll in that way. And they're sort of resourceful and they care, but they still resort to rock, paper, scissors to make difficult decisions.
They love a bit of rock, paper, scissors, don't they?
They love it. Simple decision making there, but I think there is something about the kind of the masculine roles that they think they need to inhabit, and perhaps the way they've grown up, and the life that they're used to, and it's quite a small world that they're a part of. And things, I think they learn a lot from Rhonda and the giant penis worms.
There you go. They do. Kevin Bacon, he now speaks quite fondly about this film, I think. At the time he didn't. He took this role, I think, quite reluctantly because he said he literally couldn't afford rent. He was kind of not doing well. Wow. I think his career wasn't doing too well at this point. This is before I think he really kind of took off in the 90s, didn't he? But he had a few little roles like Footloose and Friday the 13th in the 80s, but he kind of had to take this job quite reluctantly. And it became, I think, much more of a kind of cult hit than he was expecting. But now he kind of looks back on it, and this particular character of Val, he said he really, really liked that character. But yeah, I'm always a fan of Kevin Bacon. I think he's a quite a fun, charismatic screen presence.
Yeah, I really like Kevin Bacon as well. And this, am I right to think this film was not like a big box office hit, right? It didn't do well in the cinema, and it's kind of found its following later on, and as you say, is now a bit of a cult film, and kind of did well in VHS. I remember that VHS cover very fondly. I
know. So yeah, I think that's true. It was a bit of a slow burn in that regard, for sure. And I think there's this interesting thing. I mean, we just talked about Arachnophobia too, which again had this kind of PG, almost Amblin vibe to it, whilst also being absolutely terrifying, right, at the same time. And I guess this movie has something similar, doesn't it? Like, how do you find it balances the kind of the sort of PG family friendliness, I guess, with the kind of monster movie horror? Yeah,
it's like a satisfying combination of horror and comedy with a bit of action and sci-fi and the graboids, the worms, of course, are what, feel like the most distinctly sort of horror element to me. The very throwback 50s B-movie creature. But you've got that kind of nice use of the sort of OTT worm blood and guts as well. It's kind of, it's contrasted with that really great script. There's some great sort of one-liners and an almost sort of campy slapstick feel, which is quite self-aware. Every character has their kind of one-liners, but they also, and their comic moments, but they all pretty much get to be a hero or a fighter too. So I think it's a really nice balance. And as you said before, it's actually the comedy element has aged pretty well. And I guess what's scary is that these creatures could feasibly exist and they are so close to you. Like a lot of those, insect, animal, nature movies, the threat is so close to you, but is also obscured. It's also hiding. It's lurking below, like Bruce in the depths of the sea. And here, there's no getting away from a creature that occupies the ground you walk on, especially when you're stuck in the middle of the fucking desert. There's no way to ask for help. Right. So so that's pretty freaky. And as you say, it's kind of, if you've been sort of doing some of the films around this period of time at the moment, I don't know so much about earlier creature features, but are there many films of this type that kind of blend horror with humour in the same way? I was like, does like Gremlins or Critters count as like Little Shop of Horrors? I don't know.
Yeah, Gremlins is a good. Again, I think there is that. Again, there's that Spielberg connection when you think of Gremlins, and I think in the 90s there's more of it. We're going to come to that over the next couple of weeks. Films like Deep Blue Sea and Lake Placid and those kind of big monster movies, they lean into comedy quite a lot as well, but not always like that effectively. I think it's a really tough balance to get. I think this movie does it really well. I think Arachnophobia did it really well as well, actually. And I think all of that's really effective. And I think absolutely the threat is real. I think that's the thing, is that the characters are fun, the dialogue is quite silly, and there's this kind of fun ensemble of characters that live in this town. But also this monster does pose a genuine, quite horrible, violent threat. And we actually see a lot of people killed in quite gruesome ways, right? That's everything that I was kind of pleasantly surprised about watching it this time round, because it's been a long time since I last saw it. But the guy whose kind of brains have been sort of eaten out, and you just find his helmet with like the bits of flesh and brain and skull and stuff, and they go for it with the blood and that kind of, and the blood and guts and viscera in this film more than I remember.
Exactly, I felt the same. I'd forgotten that there are some pretty grim, sort of chunky gut moments that are horrible, and also the moment with the guy on the electricity pole as well. It's actually really dark. It's horrible. It's just the idea of him being stuck up there and dying of dehydration. It's grim.
Absolutely grim. And I guess that's the other thing about, you mentioned Picnic at Hanging Rock. There are these other films like this that the landscape itself is just as much of a threat, I guess. And that we haven't really looked at this yet, this series, but that kind of middle, I guess Nevada isn't really middle America, but that kind of deserty part of America. I went this year actually drove through Nevada and through Death Valley, and it is kind of quite creepy and overwhelming actually, how you can drive for like 6 or 7 hours and there's just nothing, right? It is like, it's crazy, and you do think to yourself, if I got stuck here, would I be fucked, basically? If my car broke down or whatever. But I think that's the other like interesting thing about the natural world, particularly when we look at countries like Australia and the US, that they're so vast, aren't they, and kind of overwhelming in that regard.
Yeah, and you kind of, in a way, you feel like you should be able to spot the threat from afar because there is so much, open landscape around you. And, a film like Tremors, most of it's happening in daylight, so you should be able to see a lot, and you should be able to anticipate. You think you'll be able to kind of see something coming or be able to fight back. The phone line, when they say that the phone line's been, cut off and they can't access it, it hasn't been cut off because the worms have arrived. It seems like that wasn't really working anyway because of the mountains. So you are just... You're just isolated. Yeah. There's definitely that feeling of isolation, which I think works really well. And then the fact that they are literally kind of cut off in this little town as well is really fun. And what do you think of the rest of this again really harks back to me to like sort of early monster movies, but what do you think of the ensemble of other characters that live in this little town of perfection? They are oddly likeable.
Yeah, they are.
I know that a lot of people praise Tremors a lot because of that emphasis on character development and the relationships between the townsfolk. And I think it is really satisfying and really nice, actually, to see, there's not just, the lead hero, who's the last one standing, and, a cast of characters who, when put under stress, basically just look out for themselves. Here you've got, people with varying backgrounds and they have different reactions, actually, to the kind of the situation that's happening. Some of them are gun-toting survivalists like Bert and Heather, who, they almost... I feel like in today's world, they'd be almost like MAGA lunatics, but they are, they're conspiracy theorists. They're a little bit hot-headed, but they're really game for this because they've been preparing their whole lives for it. And then you've got, I can't remember what the artist lady with her daughter, she's just very, she's freaked out. Rhonda's trying to approach it from a kind of scientific perspective, I guess. So you've got all of these different reactions, and some early stereotypes there where you expect people to behave or to act in a particular way, and then they kind of they work together, they band together. Everyone's quite pragmatic, apart from Melvin, the the kid that I don't know who he belongs to. Like, who are his parents?
The one that loves a prank. That one, he's annoying.
Yes, prick.
He's wandered straight out of an annoying teen slasher movie from the 80s, hasn't he? Whereas the rest of them haven't. Yeah, it's so true. I really like them as well. The Bert, the kind of conspiracy theorist survivalist. He's the only character I think that is in all of the films. He remains in like every single movie in the Tremors franchise and the TV show as well. Cool. So like he's kind of remained throughout the series. But I think they're all really great. There's the little girl as well, I realised, is Lex from Jurassic Park, isn't she?
Yes. So that's like 3 or 4 years later, probably. So, and I had this sort of sense of when watching, like, she looks familiar, but she's even in like a few years, she's changed a lot, hasn't she? But yes, the little girl on the pogo stick or wherever it is, just completely. I think she's just seemingly unaware of everything.
Get off your pogo stick, for God's sake! Who uses a pogo stick anyway? For God's sake!
I know. Have some decorum, God, honestly. And then we've got Rhonda as well, who's she's the most exciting news that Perfection have had in a while, especially for Val, because she's female and she's new and she's an outsider and she's a pole vaulting extraordinaire as well. She's this she might not be stereotypically beautiful as Val expects, but we know that underneath that nose covered in sunscreen, she's gorgeous. She's a geekier outsider who everyone kind of turns to because they expect her to have all the answers. And actually, she is the one that comes up. She's the most resourceful in a way. I think the women in the film actually are. She kind of, she suggests the pogo stick. Oh my God, the pole vaulting.
Yeah.
And then Heather is, I feel like she's a slightly calmer influence on Bert, isn't she?
Yes,
she's kind of a
definitely.
bit more sensible and pragmatic. So as usual, the ladies have got it locked down, I think.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. And so you've got these smart, pragmatic women. You've got these funny, wacky but quite kind men, right? You've got this great group of characters in this town, and then you've got the monsters. Steph, let's talk about the graboids, as they're known by, right? And I think what's so great is, again, this movie kind of plays with conventions of the disaster movie trope as well. There's almost like a kind of earthquake vibe to it initially, because it's just about, like, as the title suggests, these tremors. And then, of course, it turns out that what is actually going on, there are these giant worms eating people, these big phallic creatures that pop out. They are amazing, right? Like, how do you find the design of the creatures, the graboids? You know, these huge, giant worm-like creatures that open up and they've got tentacles and kind of smaller worms that come out and everything. And I think they still look absolutely incredible, right? But how do you find just generally the design of the graboids?
They're cool, aren't they? They are very satisfying, very practical, tactile, quite impressive it feels for sort of 1990. I know they're created by the creators who've made all kinds of things, from sort of Jumanji and Mars Attacks to sort of, you know, Godzilla versus Kong and Smile. I was having a read about it in the background. It seems like they've, you know, been behind so many creatures and so many effects, but it's sort of like an elephant seal meets a worm with snakes, and we don't see them fully initially, do we? You kind of get just the snakes, so there's like a gradual reveal, so we kind of see the snakes and under the ground and the corpses they leave behind, and it kind of, you know, the earth rippling, and it kind of builds to that moment where we're suddenly confronted by these sort of almost Dune-esque Shia Halud.
Yes,
massive.
It's very Dune, actually, isn't it?
It is. It's very Dune. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know this until I was, of course, having a wiki, that Ron Underwood worked with National Geographic before as a sort of documentary director. So he used his knowledge from there to sort of develop these creatures into something that would feel quite realistic, which I thought was really cool.
I think that's really cool. And there is something about it. There is something, obviously these creatures look like monsters, but there is something about them, the way they move and the way they behave, that you could, you know, that it does feel like, okay, some thought went into these creatures, into making them feel quite real, like a real threat, you know, and I think they are amazing. And again, I know it did just keep making me think of Dune, and obviously the Dune book existed by this point, and the David Lynch film actually as well. But when they were talking about how they can get away with kind of moving around without the worms feeling the vibration, I was like, you've got to do that weird fucking walk that they do in Dune.
Have you tried doing a dance? Yeah. That would have solved their problems, wouldn't it?
Just thinking of Timothée Chalamet sliding his feet around in the desert.
That's what I was thinking of. Doing a little wiggle on the dunes there. Yeah, lovely. But something that is good about the graboids is that they evolve as the film goes on. So they're way more intelligent than you expect. They try different approaches to reach their victims, and they sort of study the buildings to try and figure them out. So the cast, the people have to evolve their thinking too, because they're wild animals with behaviours and weaknesses, but they also seem to, there's like an element of intelligence there that's actually quite freaky, and we never know where they're from, do we? They could be space aliens, they could be the result of climate change, or, you know, Val says something at one point about them, you know, it could be radiation mutations or built by the Russians, which is a classic, but we just never know.
No, that's true. And I don't know, I'm sure people can tell me and write in, but I don't know whether we get more of an explanation as to where they come from in any of the later films. But yeah, I wondered that too. I mean, the fact that it's in the Nevada desert does make me think, is it some sort of atomic radiation, right? Is that what's kind of caused them? But yeah, I like that we never know. I think that's really cool. And I like the fact that, obviously, you know, the movie was kind of set up and initially conceived as like a kind of Jaws on land. I think a working title for it was Land Sharks, right? It's been so funny, like almost every film I've talked about since Jaws, every animal attack movie since the 70s has been like Jaws with an alligator, Jaws with a whatever. And it's kind of the same here, but again, really effective in the way that, like you said, it takes a while for us to see the fully realized monster. And before then, we're just seeing, you've got a kind of camera POV that kind of races along the ground, and you've got the amazing, the kind of, what would you call it? Like the kind of, the ground that comes up, basically, like protrudes as it's moving along as well. And they did that apparently by kind of creating a big kind of like gutter thing, and then pulling a boy like along by a rope, like a boy that you get in the sea, not like a little boy.
I thought you meant a small boy.
No.
I was like, who got that job? Just a small boy under the thing that they're pulling on a boy. Yes, B-U-O.
Exactly. B-U-O-Y. What Americans, I believe, pronounce them as buoys, but we call them boys. So there you go. Yeah, they dragged a massive boy along under some dirt, and then apparently the crew kept actually forgetting where they'd left it and losing it in the middle of long shoot days as well, which is hilarious. But I think that's what it is, like you said in your original synopsis, that everything about it feels very tactile and very real, right? This is what I kind of love about this particular era. We talked about this with Arachnophobia. We've even talked about it with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Like, everything feels like it was made and built, and I really love that, you know?
It's really, it's a satisfying watch, isn't it? And it does, there's something about that does make it more believable and more freaky.
And then, like you say, this kind of constant, like, battle of the people and the worms and them trying to outsmart each other and trying different ways to defeat them is actually really fun. There's a lot of kind of like problem solving almost, like with the people in this town, like kind of, you know, the moment when they think about throwing the pipe bomb in its mouth, but then there's that moment when it spews the pipe bomb back up again and lands on them and you're like, oh shit, you know, like I think again, like it never really feels slow, this movie, does it? Like, it's like constantly moving along with like new updated set pieces. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. It keeps things nice and tense. It kind of moves between, you have those moments where they're sort of strategizing around a table, and then the action set pieces when they're on the roof, coming up with, you know, ways to get away. And then there's moments of sort of quiet where, you know, you've just got the sort of, in terms of sort of sound design, there's not a lot going on because they're waiting for something to happen. And then you've got the big sort of almost like the jump scares, and it just keeps going. And it doesn't just recycle the same formula over and over. They are trying to, as you say, strategize and kind of outwit each other and, you know, try all kinds of things that I guess you do if you were stuck on a roof somewhere with the sun baking down on you. But it's just, it's a good time.
Really fun. It's really fun. Do you think there's anything more to it than Big Monster Movie? Like, is this movie, you know, quote unquote, saying anything or exploring anything? Or is it just what it is, do you think? What do you reckon?
I think you can give it a good go, can't you? There's, like, I mean, we've already said it's definitely a deconstruction of masculinity and gender stereotypes for sure. I mean, there's probably something there about the setting and the rural community and the threat of the outsider. You know, you get that, I think for me, you get that sense that the community is struggling to survive even before the graboids arrive. Like, I was thinking, like, how do Val and Earl survive as handymen? How do they have enough jobs when there's like 14 people there? And how is the other lady making money as an artist? Like, they're totally isolated from everything and everyone. And I'm sure I feel like they might mention the economic recession at some point.
Yes.
They do, don't they? And Val, like, there's a moment really early on where Val sort of calls the dirt track in their town a freeway. Like, it's like small town living is all they know. They've got big dreams of, Earl and Val have big dreams of escape, but they keep being pulled back. And part of you kind of you want them to make it, but part of you wonders whether they'd survive in a bigger world as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's something there. And obviously the worms are like a well-worn metaphor for sort of threat of the outsider, and, you know, what happens when your community or your sort of stability or identity is threatened by an external force. And Val talks about, I mean, wondering if they're built by the Russians is like a classic paranoia to have, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I guess those are some elements, some subtext that you could pick apart a little bit. I mean, it's not... I agree. It's not doing a huge amount of work, but there's elements.
I think there's elements as well. Yeah, absolutely. I think all of that is in there. But it's light touch, and that's actually quite nice about it as well. Like, I think its main concern is just being really entertaining, which, again, it really is.
Yes. Yeah. First and foremost, you are having fun, and we're not sad about it.
Well, there you go. Anything else you want to mention about Tremors? Any highlights or anything that we've missed before we wrap up?
I love... I mean, my favourite scenes are the couple in the car. I love the way the car is sucked into the ground, right? And the way they find it later via the car radio. That's kind of spooky.
So good.
And the pole vaulting. I can't say that word. I keep thinking about pogoing as well. It's like they've become the same thing in my brain. Pole vaulting. When they're, doing it, there's that lovely wide shot of them sort of vaulting in unison, isn't there, over the rocks? So, there's just
so good.
Yeah, it's just, I just had a lot of fun, I do think there's a lot of films in this subgenre that are a good time, and Tremors isn't the scariest film as an adult. I don't find it scary, but I find the tension really effective, and I love, like Jaws, I love that the majority of it happens in the sort of stark daylight, and I don't think I watched it until I was probably like a teenager, so I was a bit too old. But if I watched this as a kid, I'd be pretty scared. It'd be a great sort of early gateway film, wouldn't it, to watch with a young person.
I agree. I'm kind of sad that I missed out on this film as a kid. Actually, I didn't see it until I was much older either, because I imagine this would be quite a favourite when you're young, I think, for sure. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think it's really, really fun. So obviously it spawned 5 direct-to-video sequels. Tremors 2, Aftershocks in 1996. Tremors 3, Back to Perfection in 2001. Tremors 4, The Legend Begins in 2004. Tremors 5, Bloodlines from 2015. Tremors, A Cold Day in Hell from 2018. And Tremors, Shrieker Island from 2020, and a television series was shot, Tremors the series as well. So, I mean, it's really been going strong this last 30 odd years. Have you kind of seen anything else, Steph, beyond the original Tremors?
Can I admit that I haven't? I know we were debating, weren't we, whether to watch more, and part of me thinks, why ruin a good thing? And also I think I simply don't have enough time left of living to watch all of them. I sense that
this was my problem.
Yeah, I'd probably give number 2 a go. I feel like, the first sequel sometimes can be a bit of fun, but I don't think I can stretch to sort of 6 or 7. I just don't think I need it. This holds.
We talked about it together, didn't we? Because Steph, you've been such a trooper on this podcast, because we discussed 5 Phantasm films together in a single episode. We've discussed 5 Twilight films together in a single episode, and we did consider doing all of the Tremors. But I agree, I just do not have the time, especially at this time of year. So we had to make that decision.
Especially at Halloween.
Yeah, but maybe one day. I did really enjoy this movie, and I thought to myself, maybe one day I'll do a little Patreon, Tremors retrospective or something.
That would be good.
Yeah,
or if we're lucky enough to have another pandemic and a lockdown, maybe this is one you can save for them. That's when I last rewatched all of Twilight. So this is a great little panny watch, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, there you go. Well, Steph, thank you as always. It's been such a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. And let me finish by asking you, what's your favourite movie from this whole kind of animal attack eco horror subgenre? Do you have a favourite?
Oh God, that's really hard. And Jaws is a massive cop out.
But I mean, it is perfection, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I have got a big love for Lake Placid, because it was one. It was. I think that was one that I possibly taped on VHS off the TV at some point when I was a teenager, and I know it's silly, but it's just a lot of fun. Did you cover Picnic at Hanging Rock? Was that part of this?
I did. Yeah.
And as I say, that I would absolutely put that up there as something that does actually scare me, in terms of that. Yeah, what in the natural world I do find very freaky. I'm all right with, I can safely stay away from bears and sharks and, for the most part, snakes. But all of that creepy, otherworldly, atmospheric, sublime landscape stuff is probably my favourite.
Yeah, I mean, Australia is terrifying, let's be honest. Let's all admit it. It's terrifying.
Proper creepy. Don't know how any of you manage it out there, really.
Exactly. There you go. Well, Steph, thank you so much for stopping by. It's always a pleasure. Let people know, where can they find you? Where can they find more Steph McKenna out there in the world?
So you can find me on social media when I'm active at Steph X McKenna. I have a Stephen King zine series called Outsider that I would love people to check out if you're a big fan of Stephen King's work, his writing, but also, you know, film adaptations and the like. You also catch me on Fresh Blood, where I, little corner of the Evolution of Horror Patreon. You'll find me there talking about all the newest releases with the lovely gang over there. So, that's where I am.
Amazing. Steph, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Nice to see you.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. And one more time, a huge thank you to my brilliant two guests from this week, Steph McKenna and Jen Handorf. What a fun double bill. I absolutely loved both these movies. Such a joy to watch and talk about. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do get in touch. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us, of course, on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode and these two movies with fellow listeners, you can join the Evolution of Horror discussion group on Facebook, or you can join the Evolution of Horror Discord. If you want to sign up to bonus episodes, we've got some really fun stuff coming up on Patreon over the winter. We're going to be kicking off our found footage miniseries very, very soon. So if you want to get involved in that, sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can find this podcast in all the usual podcast places. And if you get a spare minute, I'd be so grateful if you could drop us a little rating and review on Apple or Spotify or whichever is your podcast app of choice, as that always really helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, on to next week then, and we are going to continue with 90s creature features. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the co-hosts of the Horror Queers podcast, Trace Thurman and Joe Lipsit, and we are going to be discussing Anaconda from 1997 and Deep Rising from 1998. Cannot wait. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.